We, as professionals, sit behind our servers, our websites, our apps, our virtual platforms. We dream up all kinds of content, images, interactions, and screens full of what we think is relevant and useful. And then we literally lob all that virtual stuff over the digital wall and into the world with our fingers crossed, hoping that the right people find it and hoping they can make sense out of it if the finding part actually happens. But what happens if we decide to no longer play the role of the man behind the curtain and we build actual relationships and initiate in-depth dialogue with the real people in charge of our success? In this section, you'll learn how to go to the source of your online events and actually listen to real users in their real lives in the real world. Finally, we're going to finish this workshop with another method of inquiry that honestly I think is going to change forever your view of your users, their individual lives, and their humanity. Now, at the center of HCI are all these individual humans and the larger collective global audience. So there's a humanistic approach now available within HCI that allows us to do a method of inquiry that I think is important for you to know about. And it's one that I've used consistently over the last number of years. It's really become second nature for me. I include it in everything that I do in this realm of HCI study. And really what it is, it describes our ability to sit down with a user, with a real human being, and conduct a spontaneous, dynamic dialogue with them about their lives, their interests, their online patterns, and their frustrations. Let me tell you about how this all came about. A little history. So I learned, or I should say I discovered this almost by mistake. My early days of user experience research started shortly after I had left Hewlett-Packard in the late 90s, about 20 years ago. I took on some project work with a friend of mine that owned a web design company. And I had actually hired him in this web design company while I was still at HP. HP was still about half of his business, so he graciously threw me some work as I was getting up to speed in my new endeavors. He was dabbling in usability at the time. He'd built a small test lab. Now, he was a musician, and he had these banks of audio equipment, and he had stacks of VHS recorders. He had several cameras. He had some cheesy plastic plants. He had hired a woman to run this whole usability lab and this whole process. But unfortunately, she wasn't up to the task, and she got in way over her head with a massive usability project with HP. At that time, HP had literally thousands of obscure accessories for their high-end electronic instrument business. And that's what you see in this image here. These are all these very expensive, very high-precision electronic test equipment instruments that HP was selling. And in the late 90s, designing a web interface for thousands of these gadgets and devices was a massive undertaking. So rightly so, HP was trying to run it all through a user testing to see if real people, real engineers could make sense out of all this complexity. Now, the project was in danger of a major crash and burn because this woman was really having a hard time keeping all these moving parts on track. And the risk, of course, because HP was half his business, was that if he couldn't salvage this, then he was going to lose a lot of business from HP. So he asked me to jump in and see if I could salvage this project. Now, it didn't hurt that I had recently managed that part of HP's business. So not only was I able to pull the project out of the fire, I also discovered how to do user research in the process. When I was asked to salvage this, I found myself in a position where I had to sit down with a set of users and really get inside their heads. These were engineers that use all these test instruments. Now, it was probably a good thing that I didn't have a lot of training in usability because back in those days, 20 years ago, it was not common practice to have a conversational, free-flowing interaction with a user, which is really what this section is all about, what I'm trying to impart to you here. Back then, usability tended to be highly scripted, highly structured, and it tended to take a much more scientific approach. The assumption was that good research requires you to very precisely replicate the inquiry process from one session to another, from one user to the next. And in order to maintain that consistency across sessions and users, you had to be very rigorous about what you said and what you did and what you asked. But because I didn't have any formal training in that rather rigid approach, I just sat down with the users and started having conversations, free-flowing conversations. And I found I was good at it, and I discovered I enjoyed it, which helped a lot. And I've been doing it ever since. And I have further expanded, actually continually expanded and developed that free-flowing conversational approach ever since then. Now, hundreds of research projects later, I know that this approach can and should be applied to everything else I've taught here. Assessing usable and useful, uncovering the user narrative, confirming seamless and functional integrity, learning emotional design and dance that we just talked about, directing the advanced methods of the art of the DART and the progressive HCI study, which was in the advanced workshop, and balancing quantitative inquiry with this qualitative method. It affects all of those. It's really essential to every single aspect of all of those. So all of the HCI processes that I've been sharing with you deal with deep technical requirements. They deal with a clear process orientation, and really they demand rigor, objectivity, repetition. And they also involve and depend on real human beings, on real users. So you have to balance these. So this direct, personal, and dynamic process of user interviews, with or without a script, and with a fluid, responsive, creative flow, will uncover critical insights, again, that can be gained no other way. Your ability to sit with a user that you've carefully selected from the billions of people on the planet and facilitate with that person a productive interaction is a truly indispensable capability. And it's one that's hard to quantify. It's very subjective, and it's very valuable. That's why I saved this one for last. It's an approach that cuts to the heart of HCI. Even when I have a script, when I sit with people, I often put the script aside and I'll go through this conversational approach with the user for 20 or 30 minutes or half the session. And then I pause and say, okay, let me check my notes to be sure I haven't forgotten anything. And when I go back to the script, I find that I've covered 80 or 90% of what's in it, and actually a lot more that we didn't anticipate when we wrote the script. I also find that my work is far more satisfying using this method. As I mentioned earlier, it's just more fun. It's more enjoyable to sit with someone and have an engaged, animated, interested conversation and exchange about what's going on, about who they are, what matters to them, and how they go about conducting whatever it is that they do in their lives day to day. It's a much more natural and satisfying way to conduct this kind of inquiry and research. So, starting a dynamic, insightful conversation with a willing set of your users and learning how to real-time drill incisively into their core concerns to notice and unpack their most subtle behavioral clues that they may not even notice, to adapt to the flow of the interaction, to their style and their actions, and to focus intently on the most important and relevant questions and issues, all of those are key skills. And all of those are key business and artistic competencies that are going to help you be a lot more effective and successful in this world of HCI. But the fact is, some people can do it better than others. If you direct this process, or if you enlist somebody else to do it, here are some of the key abilities to remember. So you want to learn these, or find someone that can do them, or find someone that can help you with them. Be sure that you have the ability to think on your feet and adapt to a spontaneous flow. Users will pick up on this and respond accordingly if you're not being real mechanical and you're really listening and reacting to what they say and what they do. Appreciate the essence of the narrative process that we explored earlier and work on uncovering it with users. This is a great time for you to really understand who they are. And that really relates to this whole idea of the doer as well. And so now is the time to really listen, really ask, and really get inside their heads and inside their lives and what they're up to. Observe acutely and ask accordingly. Notice body language. Notice when they make sounds. Notice when they have their facial expressions. Sometimes those are going to be more important and more revealing than what they say, especially if you can openly ask them about it. Why did you make that face? Or why did you scoff at that? Or why did you giggle? Ask them, pay attention to those things and ask them that. Simple communication skills and listening are so critical here. So any capability you can bring to that process is going to be really important. Also, your ability to easily and in an authentic way quickly develop rapport and show honest interest and regard is going to help break the ice. And then any small talk or pleasantries that you can insert was going to put the user at ease and help them open up. It's going to help everybody open up. It's just going to make the conversation flow more easily. Everybody's going to be more comfortable and be willing to share and be open about this whole process. Also, whatever use case view you have of the devices or the systems that you're evaluating, or what you may or may not think about the users and what they're doing, you have to be willing to put that worldview aside. You have to be willing to rethink and reconsider what's actually going on and set aside your preconceived notions about the users and about these systems. The more open-minded you can be, the better this is going to work. Finally, be able to do and speak and act metacognitively. And what that means, metacognitively, means that you can step back from the process, from what you're actually doing with the user, and refer to it. So for example, one way to do this would be, the next thing I'm going to ask you is this. And the reason I ask you this is because I'm trying to get to the heart of X. That puts that metacognitive context around everything that they're doing, which allows you and the user to kind of step back from it and be able to appreciate the process and what it is you're trying to accomplish. So you'll find that process very useful as well. Okay, so why is this important? As our 5 core truths have revealed, all online events are decided by real people, and all those people have real lives, real needs, real interests, real preferences. The better you can develop a deep understanding of who those people are, the better off you're going to be, and ultimately the better off they're going to be, because you're going to do a better job for them. This establishes a critical respect and regard for your audience. Your ability to have this kind of interchange is going to ultimately be reflected in what you're able to accomplish online and how successful you're going to be in the world. And that respect is going to pay dividends. So be willing to commit yourself to that. And again, as I say so often, this dialogue, as well as a lot of the other processes I described, is going to help you uncover stuff that is not available any other. There's no other way to get these insights than what I just described. So possibly the most critical information that you will uncover are the answers to why people do what they do, to really understand their true desires and motivations. The answers to why are going to be possibly the most important thing you can discover about the real world, real users, and why people are out there doing what they're doing. Now, the other thing that happens here is that the line of questioning and dialogue that you follow in many cases will lead you to discoveries that you didn't anticipate, that you didn't include in the script, that you didn't even think were there. Your willingness to follow those rabbit trails and be willing to drift off script and really follow where the user's thinking and what they're saying can uncover some things that I think in many cases will surprise you. And finally, as I mentioned, this approach to building rapport and relationships with real users, it's going to enhance your endeavors. It's going to enhance what you do. It just makes your work more enjoyable to have these real relationships and these real interchanges with real people. Okay, so there are a number of things here that you need to know that we've covered, but let me reiterate some of them. You need to know who it is you're going to initiate this dialogue with. We used to think that getting to the real insightful discoveries about users required a vigorous systematic search for the right people. But I found that most people will easily engage this process. People, almost without exception, like to be asked their opinion. They like to talk about themselves, and they appreciate being listened to. Having done this for many years, I think some people don't get much of that in their lives. And if you provide them that, if you treat them that way, they're going to jump at the chance, and they're going to open up, and they're going to share with you things that you're going to find very helpful and very useful. Again, this is an area that's difficult to train because I really believe that to some degree you need to have some inherent ability to make these connections, to conduct this dialogue, to listen actively, and to be able to shift and adapt the discussion based on real people's reactions. And so it has to start with an honest regard and interest for your users as a whole and for the specific person you're having this exchange with. So that's important to keep those in mind. One approach that works almost without exception is to simply tell your subject that this type of dialogue is your goal. Tell them that with their best interest in mind and with the best interests of people like them, you really want to have an open, animated, and frank discussion about their lives, their day, and whatever subject matter you tend to converse about. Encourage them, assure them that there's no right or wrong answer, and ask them what else they want to add that you maybe haven't brought up with them. Now, scripting helps. You'll often think of great questions in that planning phase that you'll want to bring up. And again, be willing to reframe questions, redirect the flow of the discussion, and ask somewhat risky questions real time, whether they're in the script or not. Sometimes you'll think of a particular angle on one of your scripted questions that pertains directly to what your subject is discussing. And sometimes it may come totally out of the blue. Okay, this, as I've mentioned, is a complete game changer. You've heard me say it countless times. It is about the users. They run the show. Their lives and needs and interests set the tone for everything. So why not learn and practice and master the process of truly connecting with the source and the driver of all that you will attempt and all that you will succeed with online. This is where it comes from. This is how to interact with those people that are going to determine how successful you are and where you're going to go in that online world. And again, the degree to which you can master this will show up in how you interact during the dialogue sessions, and more important, it will show up in everything that you do online and what you put in front of all of those users out in the world that are the source of everything that's going to happen for you.